Is today the actual your time?
Good morning. We'll do this class in honor of my father's Yahrzeit today, 616th Yahrzeit. So in Ayin Beis, we are page 1200. And what I thought of doing today is going over what we had learned, but we'll do it in Tafresh Pei Beis, the Frierdiker Rebbe's way of citing and explaining this last section. So what did we learn? We came to end of the paragraph on page 1200. We learned was that in the process, the cognitive process of connecting with and identifying and experiencing godliness, step-by-step process that ultimately leads us to actually perceiving with our mind, as if we see it, the truth of the divine reality. But it begins with the Hizbonenus. We're talking now, of course, the divine that we don't see through existence. In other words, the Sumar Menechem Yechudet Tata that we see by looking and observing nature and existence, you can come to realize and recognize what he calls, with the very eyes of flesh, the divine force that creates and sustains and perpetuates existence. Here we're talking about Yechudei Law, levels of the divine that we cannot see with our eyes. There's nothing to hold on to. It's purely what we're taught and what we learn, but even that can be assimilated and internalized through the process of Chachma, flash of an idea, where there's that total, that intensity, and that resonating truth, but it's still not comprehended by us. Then the Chachma will begin to process and become a Bina. First, a Bina within Chachma, that's born within Chachma, the Havein B'Chachma. Havein B'Chachma, yeah. And then the birth of Bina itself, Bina, a full comprehension. And there's the Chachma in Bina, Chacham B'Bina, where you come to make sure that Chacham makes sure that you're focused on the point of departure till we get to the Nekudas HaTamsis, the summation of it all, that connects it to the original point that was that initial flash. And that has now a clarity that's in some ways even more clear than the Nekudah of Chacham and the Nekudas HaTamsis. And then there's the Iyun Hamokas Hadas, where we immerse ourselves with a concerted effort to apply and relate personally to this idea, make it ours. And they come to Hakara and Hargosha, a feeling and a recognition. And in recognition itself, he went from one level to the next, to the point of Hisamtus, of a complete recognition of the truth of it, not just the truth of the idea, but also the truth of godliness itself. And that leads ultimately to that longing that comes from love. When you love something and you see it with your mind here with such clarity, that it actually creates that aching love, which is chelas ava, the love sickness, which causes the person to, because you're now so close to it, but yet you don't have it. So before this whole contemplation, you don't have any chelas ava because you're just not aware. Now you are aware, and you've gone through a real rigorous process of a deep connection to what godliness is all about. So this comes to the point where it creates this, okay, it says, from the very intense yearning and thirst to the divine, he comes to cheli mamish, comes to literal illness.
Are you reading Tafresh Pei Beis?
I'm reading Ayin Beis, page 1200. From the lack of the revelation and the inability to quench this intense and awesome thirst. And that's a mitisin chelasava haba b'chinas riyah dafka. This is true chelasava that only comes when you're in a state of riyah. What he says, riyah ayin aseichel, that you've come to da chachma bina das, which is the ultimate riyah. You're so connected personally to the very nature, the very truth and reality of godliness. The soul is not sated, is not satisfied, and its thirst is not quenched in any way. With any gilead, that's not enough, because you are now experienced what Elokus in its full senses, and Hashed out of four amitis, the true healing will be la'osid when we'll have the riyas amauz bizgalus mamish in the form of shuv. La'osid love, when we'll have this riyah b'izgalus. Where now we don't have it in that way. We have it as much as we can with our minds, we perceive it, but we don't have it. That's what causes the illness. That's what causes the thirst, the deep thirst. But then we'll have it, and it'll also be in a form of shuv, not just a rotzeh, we're yearning for it, but it will be internalized in the full sense of the word. So today we can reach the highest level we can reach of becoming so connected to that we sense its reality, and that only makes it even more thirsty, because we don't have the complete thing, which explains why the Rebbe and the Rabbeim would cry so much for the Geula, because they saw it with their eyes, but we didn't have it in actuality. They may have had it to some extent, but it was definitely not what we call the full-blown Geula. So even for the Rebbe, Geula would be deeper, no matter what connection he has now, be deeper when Mashiach comes. Okay. One more point I want to make before we read Beis was he also made a very strong emphasis when we finally said that the real chiddush here is, well, he doesn't say the real chiddush, let me correct myself, but the samtus is that seichel itself, which is an intellectual cognitive process, it says seichel itself comes to recognize the emeskite, of something that's higher than seichel. Es legt sich up in seichel, does was is hechev is seichel. So seichel itself is not a keli for it, because seichel, its very rationale, as we learned, is a concealment on pure truth of godliness. Not because seichel is full, but seichel is limited. The parameters of logic are limited in their experience. Like, can seichel fully comprehend and contain love in general, even love to another human being, let alone love to God? There's a place where seichel cannot go because it's limited in its parameters. And yet, and he says, yet seichel can become a klei poshet, not a klei makabel. So the seichel cannot receive it as you would say receive an idea that you learned from your teacher, but the seichel can sense the truth of it. So seichel, for example, a person who's in love with another, with their spouse, the seichel can't understand it, but the seichel can appreciate it and feel the truth of it. And seichel is remember, seichel is looking for truth, but seichel still has its limited tools. So as much as seichel brought us to this level, chachma bina das, but the deepest levels of das, he says, that hakara, and not just hakara, the samtus not just of the inyan sichli, not just the samtus sichlis, but the samtus of the inyan itself, seichel can appreciate it, even though it can't contain it and explain it. It's like I say, I fully recognize the love, but I can't explain it, but it's there. So he says, "Es herzich in seichel," and that's the hanocha primis ma'ed b'seichel b'nefesh. And then you can come to the eitzem atshuka that we just read, that deep yearning and thirst. So we're going to learn this now. I want to read it in Tafresh Pei Beis. It's till now, it's always been the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, taking the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer here and elaborating on it. So it always can be helpful. First of all, it's a review. And secondly, we're going to have additional points being made. So if you have any questions, I would hold them up till we finish reading Tafresh Pei Beis, because we're going to go over this now again, this topic. And then, based on time allows, we'll see whether we continue inside here. So I'm going to go to Tafresh Pei Beis. It's been posted on our group. So if you want to follow the text, you can. The exact place The exact place is, we're going to page. Yeah.
He's calling it Tim Oinoi Hanoiro. It's a powerful
The mimer
expression.
is ish in Tafresh Pei Beis. Okay, ish Pei Beis. Page 325. Shin Chav Hey. I'm going to read it all and explain it all, so you could follow me even without seeing the text. But if you want to see the text, look at the group, the WhatsApp group there. They posted the text. So it's going back to the beginning of the chapter. Going back to the beginning of the paragraph, rather, page 1199. So after the Rebbe Rashab explained that how Chachma affects Bina, by causing it in two things. First of all, making sure the Bina, the understanding, is not wandering off in the wrong places, but keeping focus to the central idea. And two, that it brings a Nekudas HaTamtzis. That brings it Karev, brings it Miskarev El Etzem Ayin. In other words, after the long process of understanding and comprehension, brings it back to a punchline, a summation, a synopsis that's aligned with the Nekudas HaSkola of Chachma and has that deep clarity. So the next paragraph begins, V'cheinu b'chol is b'nus alaki. So the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe is following that same structure. Did someone want to say something? Okay. So it's on page 325.
The article posted by Rabbi Weingarten is 16 pages, and it starts on page Kuf Lamed Beis.
I don't know those pages, I'll be honest. I have it in the book. I said then that he posted something that is some different pages. It's
how far into? Yeah, sorry.
It's chapter 60. That's all I can tell you. Chapter Samach.
Huh.
In the Friedrich Rebbe. So look for chapter Samach.
How does the paragraph begin?
Samach.
No, what's the first word in the chapter?
Hine Kain Sarach Lias.
Okay.
Hine Kain Sarach Lias.
Thank you.
So here we go. So this is essentially the Rebbe Rashab's Ayin Beis with additions. So what we learned. So you're going to be very familiar with these ideas, but you'll see his surface. V'hinei kain tzarich li'is b'chol hizbonus alaki. What's the kain? Just like we bring that Bina has to come to a conclusion that's aligned with the original point of departure. Says kain tzarich li'is. This is the way it has to be. B'chol hizbonus alaki. This is again word for word from the Rebbe Rashab. In every divine contemplation, Shatiya, Shatiya Asoga Gemura, Umuforetes Beribe Pratim, that there should be a complete understanding. In other words, not just a superficial or surface level understanding, or just in a short, brief understanding, but rather a complete understanding, the complete expansiveness of Bina, umufuretes, and details, b'ribei pratim, with an extensive multitude of details, ad ki ha'inyan mefuret ba'arichas ha'yesher efsheri, to the point that the inyan is broken down in detail with the longest possible expansion, or longest possible, in the most lengthy possible way. These are words that he adds that the Rebbe Rashab doesn't even say. The Rebbe Rashab says, the protein u'b'harchove dafke. Here he says, that's a pretty strong statement. In other words, you really exhausted every possible angle and every detail of this idea. Because he wants to obviously emphasize how the Nekud of Chachma has now turned into the Cheves Hanar, expansive understanding in every possible way. So we're not talking about you're still in a short, brief yud. You're already in the hay of Bina. And of course, this continues. Then afterwards, after this long, lengthy elaboration and expansion, you have to come afterwards on the Nekudas Etzem Ayin. That all this lengthy explanation has to afterwards come to the point of the core idea. Ubiyeser, and like the Rebbe Rashab said, Ubiyeser bizbonus the inyana hergish. This is true in all his bonus. Now I see how he explains with the Rebbe. We said Ubiyeser shebizbonus hu hergish. When we learned it inside by the Ayin Beis, I stopped there and I said, what the Ubiyeser? Increasingly so, b'shebizbonus hu hergish. That so I translated to mean that increasingly so when there's bonus is not just you come to the Nekuda, but you also come to a hergish. The Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe is interpreting it a bit, explaining it this way: that whatever we just said about his bonus is all his bonus, even if you were dealing with a mathematical equation, lahavda. But so much more so when there's bonus is about getting a hergish and a lakus. Ubiyesib is bonus din yana a hergish. He adds the word in Yona. That changes the pshat as the way I understood it. Ubiyona shabizbonus hu hergish. Okay, so I stand corrected from what I said back then.
So what's Beis?
What's the difference between the two?
Beis is lobby on the Nekudas
What's that? Didn't we say that you're going to let me explain and then questions come later? I didn't finish.
I don't understand this few words.
If you stop me in the middle like this, we're not going to do it the way we suggested. Don't you? I'm in the middle of discussing it right now. I mean, didn't we determine last week, 2 weeks ago, we're going to do that? If there remains something unclear after I finish, you have plenty of time to ask. I mean, I'm just trying to teach it in a way that everybody here can equally understand it, or else we're going to get a bahala here. So I hope you appreciate what I'm trying to do. I'm middle of discussing it right now. So first I wanted to clarify the word ubiyeser shebizbonus, which there I thought it meant that, okay. So here the Friedrich Rebbe is saying that this is the truth in all his bonus, as I just said. But especially more so that you need to come to Nekudas Etzem Inyan when this bonus is the Inyan, the Inyana hergish. The Inyana hergish, that this bonus is Inyan is a hergish, that der her be Inyan aleki hamuven ba'asagazu. So you could have his bonus, as I said, in a mathematical idea. You could have his bonus in all kinds of contemplation, all kinds of intellectual ideas. And also you need to come to the Etzem Inyan, to the core idea. Increasingly so, there's bonus, the Inyana hergish, being aleki. His bonus that its Inyan is about having a feeling, a sense in a divine idea, which is understood in this hasaga. So there it's even more important to come to the core point, as we already learned, because the core point is going to allow you to get to the hergish. Without it, you won't really get to the personal internal feeling for it, as we're going to learn now, what Daas accomplishes. You have any question on what I just said?
Yeah, I want to know, you said it now, you answered, but Ubiyeser, it's talking about Tzrichim Lovei Achar Kach Nekudas Etzem Inyan, that Beis.
Are you asking me a question on what I said, or you want me to repeat what I said?
No, I don't want you to repeat. I want to understand, what do you need Beyoser behisbonenus? You need the hasogug mora or meforetes beribui pratim, or tzrichim logo el nekudas etzem inyan? With
all respect, did you hear what I said?
Yeah, but I hear it very clear what you said.
There's only one thing he's talking about here. He's talking about etzem inyan, that you have to bring the bina that has soga gemura, that full understanding has to be brought to the etzem inyan. That's increasingly more so when you're dealing with something that you want to have a hergish in an inyan eliki, which is the idea you're contemplating on.
So my question is, he's talking also
I just answered your question. Etzem inyan, getting to the nekudas etzem inyan.
So my question to you is, maybe he's talking also about it has to be a sogog murum foretes at keinyan mefurot barichus hayeser efshari. So this you need even more by his bonenus. Tzrichim lavo le'esem ha'inyan, I understand, but also this bonenus at achi pratim achi gdelim. That's what I'm asking.
Why not? No problem. Hechetes. Maybe, yeah, possible. Fine that way too. But definitely etzem Ayin as well.
Thank you.
I want to just see again the comparison to Rebbe Rasha. Yeah. When you read it now back in Ayin Beis, you see that the Frierdiker Rebbe's additional word, the Inyana, really clarifies what the Rebbe Rashab said. Good. So in other words, you can have a bonus that his Inyan is not hergish in elikus. Any contemplation on any idea is not necessarily it's about a feeling in the divine. And here he's talking about something that's Inyan is hergish in elikud, that's understood in this hasaga. So now that we've established that we need to have the hasaga gemura bina, and we need to bring it to the nekudas etzem Ayin, to the core idea, he says now like this: Umizen nasa Chassidus v'tshuka pnimius v'pnimius hanefesh liyes b'bchinas kelayin ba'ed eliki. And from this will be created, once you have all these pieces in place, the chachma, the bina, the nekuda, the etzem Ayin, this will then create a stimulation, an arousal, awakening, and a yearning, an internal yearning in the inner part of the nefesh that should be in a state of dissolving or being subsumed in the divine light or the divine energy. I'm just looking at the Ayin Beis. I just want to see if it's exactly.
I'm sorry. Did you translate what is der Herr in Yiddish?
Yeah.
What did you say it is in Yiddish?
The feeling, the sense.
Thank you.
Okay.
So is Hergish like the ultimate thing he's saying, or
The ultimate? What do you mean by ultimate? We
I mean,
learned 6 levels. We learned 5 levels here. Ultimate is his samtus of Daas, where you're the highest level of Daas. We're in the middle of a process here.
Okay.
But ultimate of what? What do you mean ultimate?
I mean, we're learning Chassidus with
Ultimate is
davening.
when Mashiach comes and you mamash see godliness. That's the ultimate.
No.
I mean, we're
As far as
talking about steps in the process of a cognitive process of identifying with and experiencing godliness. So he's beginning now. We just learned this whole paragraph. We're just learning it again now with the Frierdiker Rebbe's explanations. Okay, so he says like this. V'hainu, this means, so now he's going to explain what we just said. So we said that we come to after Bina, we come to the core, the summation, the core essence of the idea, and this will bring into an awakening of a deep yearning, an innermost yearning to be dissolved, to be subsumed, to be contained, be encompassed in Elikus, in the Eliki. V'hainu, this means the kasher masigas Ayin, when he understands, comprehends the idea, Shem is beinim boy, that he is contemplating about. In a very good understanding and detailed, a good and detailed understanding. Teva means here good, doesn't mean good as in versus evil. It means a solid understanding. Proper, appropriate understanding, really understands it. Not superficially, not briefly, full comprehensive understanding and detailed. Ubo lamed on the kudas atamtsis, and he came lamed to stand on. Stand here means boy. He came to arrive Lamed here, even though the Friedrich Rebbe adds the word Lamed, in Ayin Beis he doesn't say the word Lamed. He says only boil on a kuda tamsis. Says here boil Lamed. Lamed is a word in Hebrew which means, it literally means to stand, but here it means you've arrived and you're like in a solid place. You've come to a place where now you've come to, and you're securely standing upon the nekudas hatamsis, which is essentially another word for nekudas etzem ha'inyan. Nekudas hatamsis, remember, is the summary point that sums up the punchline and the point, that the conclusion of Bina, which is aligned with the point of the beginning of Chachma, Hamuvana ba'asagahi, meaning the nekudas hatamsis that's understood in this comprehension, the summary of it. Now we continue. Now comes the next step. Umaymik Daas. And now he immerses, he delves in with depth. Maimik comes from the word eimik, depth. So it means immersion with depth, or deeply immersing himself with Daas, that concentration. Ad ki margish inyan alakisha bezeh, to the point that he actually feels this divine experience. He feels it. Because remember, up till Daas, there's no hargosha. Bina is not about hargosha. Bina is about understanding well, and also understanding the summary. So you have a very solid understanding, but you can't call it hargosha yet, because it's not about you. It's all an understanding of the idea. And understanding, again, correct understanding. Now it's becoming subjective in a certain way. Not emotions yet, because it's still das, but it's becoming hargosha, you're feeling it with your mind. Your mind is sensing this inyan aliki, shebezeh. So when ad ki margish inyan aliki shebezeh, till he feels the divine thing in it. Oz hu boli de kiloyin ba'er. And then he comes to a point of kiloyin, like the wick that's being dissolved by, absorbed by, subsumed by, encompassed, contained. I mean, all these words are good. Ba'er, in the light, in the energy of this elokus that he's comprehending and now feeling. So to use the example again of, I think it was the Rashbat, Shmuel Batzal, famous chassid, he gave the example in Tanya, chapter 3, which we reviewed, about Das, the example of the person who fainted when he heard the news that his father had passed away. Even though he couldn't read the letter, the person who read the letter continued reading. And he fainted because sein Tat, sein Vater. So the difference between knowing that his father passed away and that's his father is a pretty big leap. Das, that it's my father. So therefore there's a hergish in it, where it's not just a father passed away somewhere. It's mine. And that changes and turns it into a hergish. And that's where there's the kiloyin. Because there's no chuk if it's not yours. If there's bonus is intact and you have a very good understanding, a full understanding. He's not dismissing Bina. Bina did its job to the fullest. But one step more, is it yours? Does it belong to you? Do you relate to it personally in that sense? So that is where Das is coming in to add that element. And then, Oz Hubali de Kiloim Ba'er. Okay. I'm just following the Ayin Beis. Just want to see how the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe is. So now comes, of course, the next step, which is, we said obviously till now that Chacham is Riyah and Bina Shmiyah, and even Bina has an element of Riyah. Chacham bebina, Chacham bebina. Yet, the continuing section here is going to say that Ikar Inyan Hariyah, that's what he continues, like he says in Ayin Beis. He says now like this. And now Ikar Inyan Hariyah, who are Shemayim Das. The primary Riyah is it was when he deeply delves into it, immerses himself with Das. Now, I explained when we learned Ayin Beis, so why do we call Chachma Riyah? Because there is a sense of like visualizing cognitively. But Das is where the primary Riyah comes into play. So remember also that Das doesn't have any seichel of its own. Das is taking the Chachma and Bina and turning it into an experience of Riyah. So you can't just jump to Das. Das is the end of the process of Chachma and Bina. Now we come to the Ikar Inyan Hariyah within Das. So Riyah begins with Chachma. You have a sense of truth during the flash. That sense is also there when you finish the Bina, the Nekudas HaTamtzis. You come to the core thing. But the Ikar Inyan Hariyah, which is of course going to be part of when it's personalized, is when we immerse ourselves with Das into it. And that's what he's going to continue now. Again, everything here is already said in Ayin Beis. Friedrich Rebbe is not adding any new subject matter here. He's adding nuances and explanations, which maybe adds to the whole subject, but it's the same thread and a flow as it is in Ayin Beis. Now, since we're learning it again, you're probably going to appreciate it more, as I will, because when you learn anything again, it's always, you review it, you come more, relate to it more. So you may see some things here that you haven't seen, but check Ayin Beis and you'll see that it's literally going with that same flow here. So he says like this now. The Ikarin of Riyah is when you're immersing with depth. Das betamtzis ha'asage. By the summation, the punchline of the comprehension of Bina. And now he introduces Hakara. So he introduces Hergish, feeling, a sense. And now he's introducing Hakara, recognition. Lahakira se'inyan, to recognize. It's like something you recognize as being something you identify with. V'loishu masigay lebilvad. And not that he just understands it. He actually recognizes, as I said, you can understand that something is there, but you don't recognize with your own type of recognition. Like I mentioned, you can be talking about somebody who's a great person, but you don't recognize that person. You're told, so you accept it and you understand it. Then you meet someone you know and say, here's a tzaddik. There's an element of recognition there. It's similar, just to give an example, it says, coming from Pesach, Heim hikiru et chila, that by Kriyas Yamsuf, the children recognized godliness before everybody else. They use the word hakara, ikiru. So the Gemara says, why did they recognize God before everyone else did? Because they recognized him because they already saw God when he came to the fields, when the women, due to the decree of Pharaoh, to kill all the boys, so the woman went to the fields to give birth. And God protected them and took care of them and took care of the babies. So the Gemara says, since the children had already seen God, so when they came to Kriyas Yamsuf, in contrast to the other Jews who had not seen those miracles, they recognized, they already saw him, they knew who he was. So Hakara is more than just knowing of, understanding or knowing that there's something there, but you recognize. It's like saying, oh, I know, I already met Eliyahu Hanavi. I recognize him. So recognition is obviously very much part of the internalization of the experience. Something you recognize, you don't just know or comprehend, I should say. So he says here that makire says kach v'kach. Okay. And this recognition follows and comes after comprehension of Bina. Remember, Hasaga, Haskalah is Chachma, Hasaga is Bina, and Yediyah, or Na'akara and Hargosh is Das. Hainu, which means the Kashet Chiluhu Masig Se'inyan Betuv, Hasaga Pratis, or Ba'achavik Dela. That when he first understood the idea well, Hasaga Pratis, in a detailed comprehension, or Ba'achavik Dela, and very expansive, an increased expansion. and expansiveness. And remember that the Nekudas Teichen Hasaga, that this point is protected within him. Remember, we said Chachma keeps it protected there. Make sure that Bina remains focused, with all its expansiveness, remains focused. So the Nekudas Teichen Hasaga is so both things. Understands it well in detail, expansive, and the Nekuda is there. In other words, we're not talking about someone who's so lost in Bina they don't know what the punchline is. They know very much the punchline. Because then, obviously, Daas has a mile over that. He's saying even Bina at its best, with full comprehension and a full clarity of the focus point, and it protects it. This Nekuda, which comes from Chachma, protects the whole expansiveness, that it should be aligned with the truth of the idea, like canal, like we learned earlier. Frierdiker Rebbe is literally summing up everything we learned in the previous paragraph about what Bina is. And he comes to the Nekuda, to the end punchline, the summary, the summation of the comprehension. And now comes, and after that asaga, he now immerses himself deeply. He concentrates his das in a deep, profound way in this idea, to the point that he comes to recognition following this whole asaga. Through this recognition, this now brings him, through this recognition, you could say, Rias Hamuhus. It's like seeing the very personality with his eyes of his mind, not physically, but with the eye of his mind. That's what's achieved here. Now, you could obviously ask the question, just like I said with the children, they didn't come through Hasaga, they came only through Akara. They recognized God. They didn't have to understand anything. The example I gave seems to contradict this, but here's the key point to remember. I gave that example only for one detail. The detail is the idea of recognition. But remember, here we're talking about something that you don't see physically, and the whole thing is Yichudei Allah, ideas and godliness, levels of godliness that are not accessible on their own. So here, if you don't have a sugya, what are you going to recognize? You have to have an understanding of these divine levels, then you can come to Hakara. We will soon learn that there's the Hakara of the Etzem HaNefesh, but as we learn, but that remains concealed. So in the case of the children by Kriyas Yamsuf, there the recognition was they saw godliness with their own eyes when they were children, babies. So now they recognize them by Kriyas Yamsuf. Here we're talking about there was nothing, we didn't see Yichudei Allah. Yichudei Allah is an idea that you start learning through your Hizbonenus. Chachma, Bina. So now that Hasaga has brought to you an understanding of the idea, a good understanding. You know the Etzem Ayin, but it's still comprehension. So now comes a point of recognition. And there will be the qualification. Does the recognition come from the Hasaga or the recognition come from your Etzem HaNefesh? The Rebbe Rashab discussed that in the parentheses. The Frierdiker Rebbe is going to bring that as well. But I just wanted to make clear that the Hasaga brings it into your consciousness. So even if there's a Hakara somewhere in the Etzem HaNefesh, that the core soul connects to God, but that's not something that you can say you're conscious of. The consciousness of Chachma and Bina brings it to the point now that when you immerse yourself in Das, you come to recognition to the point of Rias Mohus, the Ayin HaSeichel. You know something? I don't know if the Frierdiker Rebbe even talks about the parentheses. I thought he's going to elaborate. I'm looking right now. It seems to me he skips it. Oh, interesting. Okay.
My sense was that he skipped it because he explained it without having to go into it in depth in the parenthetical.
Yeah, possible. That's possible. That's possible. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but he doesn't say explicitly the element, I explained it that way because I know the parentheses. He doesn't refer to the hakara sheyesh be'etzem hanefesh ba'atzmos ein sof. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. It could even be because there's two types of hakara. Because in the parentheses too, the Rebbe Rashab said hakara sichlius. There's a cognitive recognition, and then there's a hakara be'etzem hanefesh, which seems to be a far more core level, essential recognition. Like, you know, when a baby recognizes its parent, it's not a hasagas, it's not a hakara sichlius. It has nothing to do with seichel. It's to do with a natural biological awareness and recognition. But here he clearly wants to bring it into hasaga. Because Yichudi law, we're not talking about here that every Jew has a connection to God no matter what. He definitely wants to bring it into, remember, you can't have chelas ava if it's just etzem hanefesh. Chelas ava has to come from awareness, that you feel and see and experience godliness so much that you are literally aching for it. So no matter, even though there is a hakara in the etzem hanefesh, the bottom line here, the key is to bring into hakara sichlis, for sure. Okay, just clarifying that. Good. Now he continues. V'hainu, and this is the end of page 1199 in Ayin Beis. V'hainu, this means ayidei hashkida v'riba hayagia. Exact words like Ayin Beis. Through the effort and the intense exertion, or excessive or extensive exertion. Be'eze inyan eliki, in any divine matter. Shebetiv hayistaklus betamtzis ha'inyan. So this is the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe is adding these words, I believe. Let me see. Yeah. Shebetiv hayistaklus betamtzis ha'inyan. With a very, an excellent gazing. Staklus is like Riyah. In other words, how do you get to this point where you come to Riyah Samahus? He says with the effort and a concerted or extensive exertion. With a very good, excellent gazing into the core idea, which is still being how the core divine idea, the divine matter, is understood from this comprehension of Bina. So the Friedrich Rebbe is adding words here, definitely to clarify this bridge from Bina to Daas. In other words, what does it mean that you immerse yourself with depth into the hasaga? So he's adding words here, that when you put that effort and that exertion into taking the idea and gazing at it and appreciating, it says that in other words, you don't stop with just understanding well and in detail this divine level. Let me give the example I gave. You can learn Seder Shtalshlus. All the levels you see the higher levels, the Tzimtzum, the Kav, you know extremely well. Be with expansiveness. You can elaborate on all the levels and all the details. But what don't you have? What you don't have is this effort and exertion, and the words that he's using, I think, are vital. How this etzem eliki, that's this, how the divine is emerging from within all this comprehension. In other words, you can learn this whole Seder Shtalshlus, and halahavdil, it could be similar to being an expert on auto mechanics, but on being an expert a chef that knows all the recipes. So you can know the whole map, the whole geography of Seder Shtalshlus, but you didn't delve into the Etzemin Eliki. Now you could say, what do you mean? Isn't the Nekudas HaTamsis aligned with the Nekudas HaSkola, which is all about the truth of the idea? Yeah, but it could still be on a mind level. And you forget that, and not forget, but the focus is not on the alakus of it, which is the real But he says here these words. Like, why did God create the Seder Shtalshlus? In order for it to be a bridge, stepping stones, an interface between us and God. So you can know the whole Seder Shtalshlus, and if you don't have that outer focus, I'm not talking about the focus, the intellectual focus of the point of Seder Shtalshlus, of the Asaga, the Kudus HaTamtzis with the Kudus HaSkola. So now the Das is bringing that's mean the kibbutz hasagazes for Omo Bezeh. It's the Friedrich Rebbe's edition. Umatet sich in them. So here's where it comes. It's no longer just an intellectual concept. Matet sich in them means he struggles with it. Omal comes from the word effort, work, hard work. But he's saying as matet sich in them means he's not just learning it. You can learn the idea very nicely sitting and drinking coffee and or orange juice, as the Rabbi brings sometimes, and with one leg over the next, you're relaxing and reading about Seder Shtalshlus. But then there's a level where you're matazich with it, which means you struggle with it. You're how to say mataz? It's hard to translate, but it means struggling. It means that it's really bothering you, not just because you don't understand it completely, because you do understand it. But you matet sich in them, like he says, so it's like you don't just know the facts and all the details, but you're struggling until you become something that you recognize it. You find you reach a level of recognition of these levels of Elikus.
You're digging it in. You're digging in.
Okay. Okay, good. So continuing. Now, when a person does this, so this Das, I'm going to give an example again for myself because I experienced this. I remember when I started learning Chassidus and more in depth, or I say more seriously, not in depth, seriously. So I was learning then Derech Mitzvah. So it's Tzemach Tzedek. I remember which Maimer I was learning. I was learning Masa Aron Bekosef. So Maimer talks about the mitzvah of carrying the Aron, the ark, on their shoulders. The Kohanim, the Levim rather, had to carry, Bnei Kos carried it on their shoulders. They had to face each other. So it's a short Maimer. It's 5 pages maybe. 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 pages. And I was young relatively. I was like 17, 18. But with that age, you're very serious about things. And when you focus on something, you're completely there. I didn't have any distractions. I don't exaggerate. I learned that Maimer probably 100 times for sure, within a short period of time, literally from beginning to end. It's much harder to do when you're... Derech Mitzvah. I learned that Maimer so many times because when I was a little older, I probably wouldn't do it because you don't have the patience and you don't have that type of commitment. But it was coming because I really wanted to master it almost. I can't say I mastered it, but I can tell you this, that I know the Maimer till this day with the Hakara that he talks about here. And a lot of other Maimorim, I can't say the same because I didn't do it quite that way. Now, I'm not going to say I had Hamokas Hadas. I don't know what level it was, but it definitely was more than Chachma and Bina. And you see here, in other words, when you learn something that you're learning academically and abstractly, even if you're very good understanding, I'm not talking about no mistakes, you really know your stuff. But it's different than when we learn Torah and we sweat over it. When the Arizal would learn, he would sweat because you're learning your child. It's your Torah. It's your life. Chayenu ve'erech yemenu. You don't read or learn it the same way. So I just wanted to explain a bit more how you can have complete Chachma and Bina, but there's still one thing you're not matrin zech, you're not struggling and exerting yourself because you really want it to become, and not just you want to know it well, but you really becomes something you can so identify with, literally like you know it like you know your own fingers, like you see your own hand. And that's where he's talking about here, that the Das. Because if you stop after the previous paragraph, Chachma and Bina, it sounds quite nice, right? You have chachma, the spark of an idea. It's riyah, it's a resonance. You have bina, full development of the idea in detail. You have the bina is aligned to the truth because chachma is keeping it honest. You have the kudas hatamsis, the summary of it all. You could say to yourself, you know what? It's a quite a good picture here. What else do I need? But here comes Das, and Das is a whole different reality. Hiskashus, the intimacy we spoke about in Tanya. You're becoming intimate with it. That's very different. Bina, you can understand it well, and you can also be very connected with it. But there's the intimacy, that personal sense of connection, and like you said, hergish, and now hakara, recognition. So he says,
Rabbi,
now,
you're going to
once
stop for
you come-
questions?
Let me finish, because this topic is something we learned. Let me finish the subject, then I'll stop for questions. So he says now the following. I just want to say one more thing here. He's going to say like this. He'd b'meshech zman hakarose ba'inyan. So now when a person does all this, the matter in time, over a period of time, hakarose ba'inyan is in that sight, was a state in hakara. Wow, he's taichi meshach zman differently than the Pshat and Rebbe Rashab. Meshach zman hakarose. As in that sight was a state in hakara. Okay, you know what? Let me stop here. Let's take the questions, then I'll go, because this will need a little more explanation. Go ahead. What did you want to ask?
My question is in the Ayin Beis that parallels what you just read. And I had this question before, but I didn't get a chance to ask it. Let's see here. It's the second line of page 1200. I'm just going to give you the Hubal el anakuda atamtis minha saga betokea. Here's my question. Betokea da so bezeba chozek ba'magas hadas ad sheba b'idei hakara. So here it says betokea da. So he says he fixes tokea his das bezeh, and it goes on and with a great effort and depth and deepens his the knowledge ad shabali deaka until the point where he recognizes it. It seems like there's a word for this where it's circular, meaning we're trying to explain what Daas is, but he says vitokea daso, and he fixes his Daas. To me, it's confusing. It's a syllogism. That's the word, because like that's my confusion. Maybe it's not a syllogism. A syllogism, you say you define something by telling someone what you're defining, you define it with what you're defining. And so he says, but tokea das. So I thought, so here we're trying to explain how you get to das. And here in the Rabbi Rashab says here in Ayin Beis, but tokea das, and he fixes his das. So it seems like it's circular. So I'm a little confused by that.
Well, because this is the language of Chassidus. This isn't a book of digduk. This isn't a book of Hebrew pronunciation or Hebrew words. Tekei, there's no problem. We say it all the time that yaimik machshavte, for example, that a person puts his thought, immerses his thought in it. It's not circular because it could be they can be both the same word, and you're just explaining how das works. Tekei b'daite can be simply meaning that das immerses itself in something or invests in it. That's number one, on a very basic level.
It's two different things. Yaimik machshavto and tokea daito are two different things.
But let me answer his question first before we go there. That's a different discussion. The point I'm making here is that that's number one. In Hebrew, you'll find it. In Chassidus, you'll find it all the time, because it's not precise in the context. Like when you say das is one thing, and now you're immersing yourself in das. It could be the immersion is das, and you're using that word as it's a adjective for das, in a sense. That's number one. Number two, this is very much based on the words in Tanya. So I would suggest, if you really want to understand it well, you have to go back to Tanya, how he uses all the words, the adjectives and the nouns. Is das a noun or is it an adjective? It could be both. Das is usually, it's a level, but das is also an experience. So when you talk about it that way, I wouldn't be so medagdic in these words. So bottom line is understanding the message. The message is that you're concentrating your das. That's not redundant. To say I'm concentrating with my mind is not redundant. Yes, it's true. You can use your mind not in a concentrated way. That's one thing. But even if you are concentrating, there's nothing wrong with saying I focused my das or concentrated my das. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. And Tanya was chapter 3 you were pointing me back to before?
End of chapter 3, yeah. The bottom line is that with the line that you just read here on top of 1200, the Frierdiker Rebbe just used different words to explain the same idea. And he doesn't use the tekeya daite. He actually uses different words, but it's the same topic, same concept. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Now comes the next step is that when you do this concerted effort for a period of time, it's going to bring you to the next level, hisamtus. So now we're going to introduce hisamtus. Hisamtus is more than recognition, it's truth. That you recognize the truth of it. You can recognize someone, the children recognize God, but the truth of something is yet another deeper level. So he says this requires not just what we learned till now, that you need the hamokas hadas, the immersion and the recognition, what was the word he used? The shkida v'ribi yagia.
Immersion.
The immersion of das. So right now, so he says now, hine, b'meshech zman hakarose by Ayin. So the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab said he been meshech zman shemayim daite b'korose Ayin. That with over time, when you invest your das, you what did I say? Immerse yourself in depth in das to recognize the Ayin. Yachalov lidei samtus. You can come to truth. Frierdiker Rebbe has a twist to this, I think. It may be the same thing, but we'll see in a moment. He says like this: Hine b'meshech zman hakarose ba'inyan. That over time, in this hakara that he came to, in other words, he's been doing this for a while with effort and exertion. So b'meshech zman hakarose ba'inyan, with over time in this recognition. In other words, he didn't recognize it once. Keeps on doing it till he recognizes again and again. Frierdiker Rebbe says in Yiddish like this: is in der Zeit, was steht in Hakara. Oh, actually, no. You know what? I read it wrong in the first time. It's all fine. Frierdiker Rebbe is saying basically the same thing that Rebbe Rashab with a little explanation. He says in der Zeit, was steht in Hakara. Because I read it in the Zeit during the time that he stands in a state of recognition. Actually, you know what? The Rebbe Rashab for sure is saying that it's a sustained level over time of recognition. The Frierdiker Rebbe seems to be saying is in that Zeit was steht in Hakara. So if he meant the same thing that the Rebbe Rashab, it should have been in Yiddish, is as es geht durch a meshech Zeit, was steht in Hakara. Is in the Zeit, was steht in Hakara sounds like during the time when he's standing in a state of recognition, which I don't think Rebbe Frierdiker Rebbe really means. So maybe he's reusing a Yiddish, really means to say in that Zeit.
I think it's the same.
Yeah, meshech zman. In other words, it's not when he's standing in Hakara, it's during an extended time of standing in Hakara, right?
That's what I think.
You have to say that, because why would he change pshat? Yeah. Okay. Isn't it said was a state in Hakara, which means in this extended meshech zman that he's standing in the state of Hakara, oz boli dei samtus. He comes to as vert nesamas be'im darinyan. This idea becomes truth for him, reality. Interesting, he takes out the word yochel love lidei samtus. The Rebbe Rashab says he could come to samtus. The Frierdiker Rebbe says he does come to samtus. Okay. The samtus zu, okay, stop here. Now, so now his samtus is a reality that's more than just recognition. Now he qualifies that too. This reality, this true reality, this resonating true reality is not just the samtus seichel, that the seichel senses is truth. Shurak mashu margishes ayin, which by seichel it means that he senses margishes ayin, he feels the inyan. Koloimer, the sichle margish es amitis ayin. His mind feels and senses the truth of this idea. As men nit was ein seichel nemt zu dem amitis ayin. And nothing more that the seichel is appreciating nemtsu, the truth of this idea. But here we're talking about something more than that. Ki'im he'esamtus ha'inyan, not the seichel, not the mitis of the inyan, he'esamtus ha'inyan, that emes and that etzem from the inyan, that the thing itself you're sensing the truth of, not the idea of the thing. Not just the seichel nemtis, he actually feels the truth of the emes and the etzem from the minyan. Okay, which we learned already. I'm not going to explain it again because I already explained it. Now he's going to go through all the levels that the Rebbe Rashab went through. The be'emes, in truth, hinegami samtus seichel. Even the first level of a cognitive reality, a cognitive truth, he madrega gevei v'nifla b'yeser, is a very high and awesome level. Because that level is higher than recognizing the idea. The kashem shein adema. This is mamish from the Ayin Beis. Just like you can't compare hayidiyah haba ba'saga. That you can compare the idea, the awareness that comes from comprehension. That which means that which she understands the Ayin and knows it well. Just like you can't compare that. That's not comparable to recognizing it, with it's even deeper than that type of awareness. Because the idea, the awareness that comes, the perception or awareness that comes from recognition is higher than the awareness and perception that comes from understanding it. Yeah. It's higher than just understanding it. Like I said with the children, for example, at the Kriyas Yamsuf. Because when you recognize the idea, you get closer to it than when you are only understanding it. The Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe adds, because comprehending is shmiya, is like listening to it. And recognition is through seeing it. The Einariya mamish, it's not mamish seeing it. But it's not, but it has gone, it's already left the domain of listening alone. And has entered into the domain of sight. But it's not yet a clear vision. The Friedrich Rebbe adds this, which makes sense. Because remember, we spoke, there's levels in Riyah. There's the Riyah of Chochmah, there's the Riyah of Bina, the Tamsis, the Hirus. And now there's the Riyah that's going to come, the Akkara of Das, and there's going to be a Riyah that comes all the way to the end, the Hisamtus of not just of Seichel, but also of the thing itself, which causes the love and the aching love. Okay. So now we have a level that's not quite Shmiyah, but it's not full Riyah either. It's a new level that he's added here. Something between Riyah and Shmiyah. Between Shmiyah and Riyah. Okay. Okay, so all this is still, so that we now recognize the Hakara, the recognition is deeper than, that the perception from recognition is deeper than the perception from understanding. After the parentheses, is only knowing about it. Only that which he knows. So now, Just like Hakara is greater than Yediyah from Hasaga, same thing, you can compare someone who recognizes it to someone who senses, who comes to, whose ideas become real. So that's also higher than recognition. The Ayin Gili Kameshahu, because every Gili Kameshahu, a divine energy and a revelation as it is on its own, he's explaining now why this is higher. Something that comes as a resonating truth, is higher, infinitely higher than something that's only recognition. Even though recognition is already higher than shmiya and understanding. Now, same thing too. Now he's going to Isamtus of the Inyan over the Isamtus of the Seichel. He's not explaining. I thought he was going to explain it. Same thing. It's infinitely distant, or relatively distant. The every gili that comes from the resonating truth in mind, to the way it's resonating truth of the thing itself. So it's not just an intellectual truth, it's the thing itself is true to you. And even the intellectual truth is higher than the recognition, which is higher than the hasaga, the understanding. So understanding is like shmiya. The recognition is outside of shmiya, like riya, but not mamish riya. That's the hakara. His samtus seems to be a higher level than riya. And now we're talking about the samtus of the inyan. V'hainu, ha'etzem shel hadover v'amitase, the core thing and its truth. So you're experiencing not just the idea of it, but the thing itself is the truth of it. Und sein Emeskeit. Yeah. In Yiddish, und sein Emeskeit. Maybe the difference would be, like people may know in their minds, they definitely know that God exists. They also know that Hine Hashem Nitzav, that God is standing over you and watching you every moment. But it's still in the mind. Whereas this level is, no, it's not just an intellectual concept that's true to you. It's actually, God is actually standing there and you really behave differently. So it changes it from intellectual truth to an actual truth. That may be a way of phrasing it.
Maybe it means personalizing it. Sein Emeskeit.
Well, Zayin, he's referring to, I think, the godliness, not the person. Remember, the personalization began already at the beginning of Daas. Even recognition is a personal thing. The question is, as I spoke when I explained Ayin Beis, there's two sides to this. There's us personalizing it, but you can also personalize something that's not necessarily fully absolutely true, or it's not even godly necessarily. So here you want to have both sides. You want to have the pure godliness, not just the idea of godliness, and you want to have it completely recognizable and personal to you. So yeah. Ukanal, like we learned earlier, the emes hu sibus hadavar. Okay. The Friedrich Rebbe is now bringing some things he spoke about earlier in his Maimer that are not Ayin Beis. That when you say something is true, he explained earlier, and I'm trying to find where, I'd have to go look for it because it's not in Ayin Beis. Okay, I'll look for it later, but he seems to say that MS has three things in it. MS reflects three things. It's the cause of something. It's the actual being of something. The tachlis shel davar, and it's the purpose of something. So when you have something, you want to know the emes of it. let's say, what is the emes of this table here? So, I mean, you could say the table serves I eat a meal on it, I study on it, and so on. Or you could do other things at the table, play games. When you say the emes of something, you're saying what caused it to be. Why did God create this table? And what's giving it life force right now? And what is sibas hadover? And what is the sibas hadover? Is the first thing he is. And tachli, and what is the purpose of this thing? So we live a life where most people in the material world are not necessarily living according to emes. You know, you have money, you have possessions, you have a family, you have a home, you have a car, you have technology. Are we living up to the emes of all these things? No. We're living whatever we think is good for us. When you say the emes is saying, why did God create it? What is the real personality of the thing itself? And what is his purpose? So this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke about earlier. I didn't see it right now. I just spoke from memory. So he's saying he's now referring to that in context of what we're speaking here. The samtus bechlal harihu okay. So what do we have from this? Unzayin emeskait. Okay. So when you say emeskait in seichel, so there your mind, your cognitive, it's like an intellectual fact, an intellectual reality, a truth in the mind. But here we're talking about the emes of the thing itself. The emes of, in this case, godliness, is that you come to a recognition of the emes of this godliness in this fullest sense of the word, which is higher than just than asamtus haseichel and higher than hakara, which he's now going to continue to explain.
Why
Says
is
like
it
this.
higher than his amtus haseichel? In both cases, is about godliness. That the seichel.
I just
is
gave an
amtus.
example. You can know Hine Hashem Nitzav Alav in your mind, but it doesn't affect you because you're not, because
Okay.
it's the samtus of the thing itself. Okay, yeah. The samtus bechlal harihu l'mayla ma'hakara. A resonating truth, a reality is more than just recognition. Is higher than recognition. The hakara harihu nitfeses b'seichel al kapanim. Recognition, at least, is contained in some way by seichel. Like we said earlier, but it's not understanding it, because recognizing is more than understanding. The sichle mamish tefes by la sige. Because when it comes to hasaga, there the seichel mamish grasps the idea to understand it, and the Frierdiker Rebbe makes the point, drives the point home. Like we learned earlier, the mechanics of the idea. It has its parameters, it has its formulas, it has its structure, it has its definitions. Every idea has its definitions. That is pure hasaga. That's seichel. That's not the resonating truth of the seichel. That's the mechanics of the idea, which are necessary, but they're not necessarily something that's somewhat more than just the pure logic of it. It's more subtle. The rak makire shu came, because there it's not purely an equation or a formula. There's an element of recognition. You recognize that as that way. V'hu hanocha b'sichle. That's the hanocha b'sichle es licht in seichel. I think it should be read probably as licht in seichel, as licht in seichel, as licht in seichel. Actually, you could say licht also, because hanocha means that it lies in seichel. But here hanocha means that it's resonating in his mind. Etzamin halaki. Oh, you know what? I didn't read it right. No. Now he's already going to his samtus. No, one second.
No. That was in a kore, not his amtus.
Well, let me just see the Ayin Beis a minute. Right. In the Ayin Beis, the order is a little different. I think that for some reason, I'm not sure why the Friedrich Rebbe changed the order. But in Ayin Beis, he said that there's Hasagas Sichlis and Hanoches, and I'm sorry, not Hasagas Sichlis, there's Hakodas Sichlis. So it's still Seichel, it's still Nitvis and Seichel, but Seichel is recognizing something. The Sichle Mamish Tefes Belasige, or Bakara, who Bedaka says, Drak Makira Shu Kain. Okay, so we have to now, the Vuhu sounds like it's going to the Hakara, but the Hu is going back to the Samtus, Ha'inyan. So he said, Seichel is nitfes, Hakara is at least grasped by Seichel. It's taka higher than comprehension because there's a recognition. Now the Vuhu is going back to the Samtus. When you read Ayin Beis, it's clear that way. Vuhu ha'nocha b'sichli es liktin Seichel etzem inyan alaki. The core idea of alaki is now recognized or resonating in the Seichel. Mashalamayla min ha-Seichel. Yeah. So Hakara is not lamayla min ha-Seichel. It's not purely comprehension, but it's still an intellectual recognition. Whereas now we're talking about the etzem inyan alaki. I'm not sure why is he skipping his samtas b'seichel. Okay, because right now it seems like the Friedrich Rebbe has moved away from his samtus ha-seichel. He just moves from hakara to samtus ha-inyan. That was what threw me here. I thought he was talking in between. I'm not sure why not. We'll see what he says anyway. The leg in seichel in dem was is hechef the seichel. That which seichel senses something that's higher than seichel. And it comes in like a movement, a experience of sight, as if he sees it, as if he sees this divine thing itself. And this is completely higher than intelligence. That seichel ain't a keli. Seichel is not a container for this. The klei seichel binyan zeh urakamay klei pshuta. The keli seichel in this case, which senses it, is only like a shapeless container, not a container that receives. The loy klei hamakabel. So it's not a container that's commensurate to what is going into it. It just senses it, so it senses it. So it's only like a keli, a seamless, shapeless keli. Only that resonance in seichel, es legt sich in seichel, or das was hecher vider seichel. That the seichel senses or resonates something that is higher than the seichel, than intelligence. The zel kain be samtus. Oh. Now he does bring it back. Zel kain be samtus sichli. This is how it is even in the intellectual resonance, intellectual truth. And how much more so when you're talking about the truth of the inyan itself. Okay, he does go the way that Rebbe Rashab. He just went about a little different direction. Okay.
He compared the Hasaga was Ayin Seichel to his Amtus Sichli, which is also Seichel, and explaining that this is not Seichel.
No, he did not do that at all. That's not correct. I don't know where you got that from. That's not the correct. Hasagas HaSeichel, then comes Hakara, which is still Seichel, but not completely Hasaga. Then comes his Samtus HaSeichel, then comes his Samtus HaInyan. That's the order here.
Yeah, but about Hakara, he said only a half a line.
Anyway, learn the Inyan. I'm not going to argue about it. Learn Ayin Beis, learn here, and you'll see what I'm saying. I don't want to go now into that because I did this at length and when we learned Ayin Beis. Okay. The Zel came by Samtus Sichli. Hu ha'noche b'chushe ha'nefesh shalamayla mekeches ha'nefesh. Because I don't want to rush this, I think I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop here in the middle of this the pay Beis. We'll learn the second half of this paragraph tomorrow, but I think it's kedai to stop here right now. Because I don't want to, again, I don't want to do this quickly because the Rebbe Rashab is definitely I'm sorry, Frierdiker Rebbe is adding stuff that's not in Ayin Beis. I want to do it slowly and more deliberately. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Page Shin Chavav, the Tafresh Pei Beis, Maimer explaining the Ayin Beis, page 1199 and 1200. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments? Then please, now is a good time.
What does in the Ayin Beis? I'm sorry if I asked you this last time, but what is the Yiddish? Is Herzich in Sechel? What is that? Because that's where we're holding.
The Herzich in Sechel, his senses in the mind.
Okay, got it.
Any questions from anybody? Okay.